Hello, everyone. My name is Ezra, otherwise known as E-Soup, and today we are reading chapters 124 to 128. I apologize, I'm still getting over a cold, so I might sound a little funky, but I've got lots of tea, so I think I'm good. It was fine doing last stream sick. It was like I drank a bunch of tea and I think I sounded fine. I think I sounded okay. And then as soon as the stream was over, I was like, okay, I'm done talking for the day now. But it was worth it. If I was super terribly sick, I would say that I had to, you know, miss the stream and just push it back one, but I don't like to do that if I can help it. Um So we had a pretty eventful stream last time. Um, as far as finding out more about who the new emperor is, and we literally ended on like a finding out that her name means sword and thunder, Li Jianting, and that was that was fun. Everybody was kind of like, well, we don't love the sound of that. But I said this last time, and I'll say it again, even though the new emperor is unfortunately being used by Shui Shoujua, but I'm kind of rooting for her, like in my own way. And it's like I I'm rooting for our main characters, and separately also I'm rooting for her in whatever way that means. And I don't want anything bad to happen to her. I'm very concerned on that front. But yeah, so how is everyone feeling? Good to see y'all. Oh, and I'm glad you could make it blue. Um Trying to think like what else. Oh yeah, last time we found out about the new emperor. We found out about Hai Liang Yi's death. Um the very like C drama tropey death where he ran into a pillar. All right. Henry, you said, oh right, he did do that. He did that. Yeah. Um Oh, Henry, you can't believe you're alive after yesterday. I take it you had a big day yesterday. Oh yeah, Blue, I know you said you're like in the kitchen just hoping like nobody else comes in at the moment. That's fine. That's real. Um well, what else happened last time? We found out about how Hai Liang Yi died and a lot of political stuff. We found out about the new emperor. Um Oh yeah, and just all the politics on the chaos that erupted after Hai Liang Yi's death. We're kind of in a situation now where like the student protests are maybe not going in the direction he would have hoped they would go in. And everyone's kind of blaming everybody, and no one can escape their blame or their criticism. So things are a little bit unstable right now. Henry, oh, you had weeping on the schedule for the Arha stream. Then you listened to that moment in the audio drama too? Oh no. Oh no. I I think I've heard clips from the Arha audio drama, but I'm Yeah, I would not be prepared for that. That's a lot. So, I'm gonna get started. We are on page 153 for chapter 124, which is called The Die is Cast. The sky had begun to pale with the first glimmer of dawn. Yu Xiaozai was, after all, a scholar and not a soldier. It was no easy feat for him to stay awake so long. Shen Zichuan called Chen Yang to lead Yu Xiaozai to a room to rest. They could always ask their remaining questions another day. Yu Xiaozai gratefully withdrew from the room, leaving the letter Chen Yu had written on the table. Xiao Chiye went off to bathe, while Shen Zichuan read Chen Yu's letter by candlelight. The first rays of daylight from the courtyard seeped into the room. When Shen Zichuan reached the part about the Bianjun commentary, he hesitated, but Xiao Chiye still hadn't returned. He slid the letter into his robes, lifted the bamboo curtain, and walked along the narrow corridor to the inner chamber, stepping around the standing screen for a look. Xiao Chiye was soaking in the pool, fast asleep. He had only been a little tired, silently contemplating a few things as he soaked, yet he had unexpectedly fallen asleep. A sudden chill on his cheek woke him up. Shen Zichuan scooped more water and washed Xiao Chiye's cheek again. The water's gone cold. Go sleep in your bed. Xiao Chiye rose, sending droplets scattering, and threw a robe over his shoulders. He lowered his head and buried his face in Shen Zichuan's chest, muzzling against him until Shen Zichuan's entire front was wet. "Carry me," he mumbled. Shen Zichuan pinched the nape of Xiao Chiye's neck. "Aren't you asking the impossible? Then I'll carry you instead." Shen Zichuan kicked off his shoes and looped his arms around Xiao Chiye's neck, heedless of the water soaking his sleeves. "Go on, then," he drawled. Xiao Chiye pressed his forehead against Shen Zichuan's and wrapped his arms around him. "I saw the Beiyuan hunting grounds. They're not bad. With some tidying, they'll make a decent military camp, but the watchtowers need rebuilding. It all costs money." The lamps were not lit here, and the dimness made the very air feel secretive and intimate. Shen Zichuan's face was less than an inch from Xiao Chiye's as he said, "The city of Dancheng lies just to the west of the Beiyuan hunting grounds. If we're to face the 8 great battalions again in the future, we can't skimp on this place." "There's no rush." Xiao Chiye picked Shen Zichuan up with ease and carried him into their bedroom. Shen Zichuan knew Xiao Chiye didn't intend to use his stash of Shi clan silver, and Sizhou could not feed the imperial army forever. What was more, Xiao Chiye planned to return to Li Bei soon, and to lack money was to lack confidence. He was likely still contemplating the problem himself. "Chen Yu went to all that trouble to send Yu Xiaozai with the letter for you. He must want a favor." Xiao Chiye climbed into bed. Without bothering to take off his robe, he leaned back against the pillow with Shen Zichuan in his arms and rested his chin atop Shen Zichuan's head. "What is it?" They're so cute. They need to stop being cute. Blue, their bedroom, exactly. It's theirs. Pillowing his head against Xiao Chiye's chest, Shen Zichuan reached for the letter and finished reading it. He folded it up and answered, "Chen Yu hopes you can give everyone another chance and act as a bridge between Chudu and Li Bei." Eyes half closed, Xiao Chiye said, They must really need the help if they're willing to lower themselves like this. If the Grand Secretariat and the Empress Dowager make peace in the future, Li Bei will have to send another hostage to the capital. It'll either be me or Shun Ar. This matter was non-negotiable. His brother's son was already 6 years old, but Xiao Chie had yet to meet him. This, however, did not prevent him from doting on his nephew. Shen Zichuan softened his voice. Ten Yu is aware that this will be difficult to achieve. He hopes I'll head south to Qidong and convince Qi Juyan to break off the marriage alliance between Hua and Qi. Ten Yu spends all his time in Chudu. He doesn't know how things stand in Qidong. The Grand Marshal has no say in anything relating to this marriage alliance, Xiao Qie said. It's Qi Shiyu who's set to marry Hua Xiangyi, not Qi Juyan. Qi Shiyu is a wily old fox. He sensed the wind changing a while ago. He doesn't want Qidong to follow in Li Bei's footsteps, so he's hoping to strengthen ties with Chudu through marriage. As he spoke, Xiao Qie's voice faded into a murmur. What can Sen Yu and the rest offer Qi Shiyu now? With Hai Liangyi's death and the girl emperor's coronation, any past promises have become worthless. They have no bargaining chips they can use to convince Qi Shiyu. Shen Zichuan counted in silence for a few beats, then turned to look at him. Sure enough, Xiao Qie had fallen back asleep. Shen Zichuan unfolded the letter once more. His eyes lingered on the word Bianjun for a moment, before he closed it again. He had left that matter out. He wanted to allow Xiao Qie a good night's rest. You're correct, Blue. That would be a solution. Shui Shoujuo, however, was not sleeping. He had been spending nights in his study for several days in a row. His story about the Emperor's daughter might convince the students, but it did not impress the shrewd and experienced officials of the imperial court. Kong Chou, feeling that the blow Shui Shoujuo had dealt the Grand Secretariat by taking such advantage of the circumstances was not the behavior of a gentleman, had submitted several consecutive memorials protesting the Empress Dowager's tacit acceptance of the girl. All of them sank like rocks into the sea. He received no response. A conniving, ambitious man with grand designs. Furious with how wrong he'd been about Shui Shoujuo, Kong Chou threw those words in his face and refused to say anything more. Whether or not the Emperor's daughter ascended the throne, the imperial court officials, led by Kong Chou, had gained absolutely no ground in this battle. They had lost their anchoring pillar in the fight, then seen Han Chung defeated at last, only for Shui Shoujuo to swoop in out of nowhere. To add insult to injury, Shui Shoujuo didn't even manage to deliver an imperial son, but a daughter. Everything they had done had been in vain. Still, Ten Yu did not concede defeat. The pushback from the imperial censors was far more intense than Shui Shoujuo had expected it to be. If Shui Shoujuo thought Great Zhou had reached a point where it would let a woman ascend the throne, was he not implying that the empire had come to the end of the road, destined for doom? Only then could such a reversal of natural order, an inversion of right and wrong, be allowed to take place. Qi Juyan had met with obstacles every step of the way, simply to be conferred the title of Grand Marshal. Now, As the Ministry of Rites pored over book after book determining details regarding the coronation of the emperor's daughter, they found there were simply too many areas where they had nothing to reference at all. The sounds of castigation in the imperial court never ceased, and memorials impeaching Xue Shouzhuo soon numbered in the dozens. Are real men nowhere to be found? Pan Lin had finally found his footing in the Ministry of Revenue after years of diligent work. As a descendant of one of the old-school noble clans and the son of Pan Xiangjie, he had the most intense reaction in the court. In all its 100 years, Great Zhou has never had a female heir apparent. The principles of heaven are the laws of nature. Although the common-born descendant of Prince Yan has passed, he still has descendants of his own. If the royal bloodline is hard to find, Her Majesty can stand in temporarily for the Son of Heaven. We will keep searching. Xue Shouzhuo stood alone in the middle of these two polarized groups of officials and said in a steady voice, "The remaining descendants of Prince Yan are the children of his daughters, and do not carry the imperial surname. Do you intend that the Li clan's empire will change its surname along with its ruler? It is indeed justified for the Empress Dowager to act on behalf of the Son of Heaven when necessary. But if the harem can lead the administration, why is a female heir impossible? You are distorting the facts. Zhenyu whirled on Xue Shouzhuo. The Empress Dowager acts on behalf of the Son of Heaven. She does not take his place. As soon as an imperial heir ascends the throne, the harem will return the power to its rightful master. But if the emperor's daughter ascends the throne and gives birth to a male heir in the future, will she also return the power?" Han Chung was livid. He understood, deep down, that he too had been duped by Xue Shouzhuo. The Empress Dowager and all these old noble clans were dissatisfied because the attitude Xue Shouzhuo displayed was not one of compliant submission. He held the emperor's daughter firmly in his grasp. Should she sit on the throne, he would undoubtedly influence court administration and state affairs. To those old guards, this was a betrayal. Seeing as the Empress Dowager, sitting behind that beaded curtain, still had yet to speak, Han Chung added his voice. The Emperor's daughter has long been confined to ladies' chambers. How can she be expected to assume the incredible responsibility of managing state affairs? In my opinion, the Empress Dowager should continue to lead the administration after the coronation. On hearing this, Kong Cho was ready to throw up his hands and quit. The whole situation was one big, sticky mess. At present, none of the parties could be satisfied. They were all unhappy with the prospect of the Emperor's daughter taking the throne. One side would be displeased if the Empress Dowager continued to head the administration, but if they went ahead with the advisory chamber of the 8 cities, that would upset the students. Kong Cho was on the verge of falling to his knees and begging the heavens to drop an imperial prince from the sky. They must have been blind 10 years ago not to urge the Guangcheng Emperor to beget more sons. If there were a real imperial heir, they would never have found themselves in such a predicament to begin with. Xue Shouzhuo pointed at the old stone inscription outside the hall. Our ancestors explicitly said, the harem shall not interfere with politics, not the emperor's daughter shall not lead the administration. I wish that Xue Shouzhuo wasn't the one making good points in this situation, but that's what we've come to. Since the various gentlemen here are so critical of me, then I shall venture to ask, what, in your opinion, should be done? Do we oust the emperor's daughter and install an emperor of another surname? Or do we leave the throne empty and allow the Empress Dowager to lead the court indefinitely? A loud buzz rose in the hall, but no one stepped forward with a definitive answer. It had been the same when they appointed Li Jianheng as the heir apparent. It was as if they stood on a sharp precipice, afraid to take a step in either direction. Had Xue Shoujuo come forward a few days earlier and revealed that he had the Emperor's daughter in his care, the Empress Dowager and the Grand Secretariat together might have come up with an appropriate strategy against him, and still been willing to treat him cordially. Yet he had insisted on pinning everyone by the throat like this, attempting to seize complete control. He had both the Emperor's daughter as his trump card, and public opinion to back him up. Who would dare lay a hand on him now? Kong Qiu considered the lay of the land and gave in. Such a stalemate benefited neither the Empire nor the court. There is something the commander said which I find true. The Emperor's daughter has been cloistered in her living quarters for a long time. Even if she takes the throne, she will need to study the classics and take imperial lessons in history, governance, geography, and more. In the interim, the Empress Dowager will continue to lead the administration with the assistance of the Grand Secretariat. On this, the scholar officials had to stand firm at all costs. They had to become the authority that determined if the Emperor's daughter was fit to participate in state affairs. Kong Qiu's intent was clear. She would be ready only when the Grand Secretariat deemed her to be so. Otherwise, she would remain a student, sitting on the throne. I feel like they're going to use this to buy their time until they can find somebody else somehow. Because she's already been taking lessons with Xue Shoujuo. But if the Grand Secretariat, they have the power to decide when she's ready, like when she's learned enough. And they just might never decide that. And that's a very good point, Blue. Like, Li Jianheng wasn't a student sitting on the throne. Like, he didn't know what he was doing. To the Empress Dowager, this was also a kind of threat. If the Empress Dowager dared support the Han clan, as she had the Hua and Pan clans during the reign of Yang Yi, the Grand Secretariat would immediately put the Emperor's daughter in charge of the administration and force the Empress Dowager back into the inner palace. The Empress Dowager sat in silence behind the beaded curtain for a long time. At last, she said, "Acting on behalf of the Emperor had me feeling uneasy day and night. Since there is now a candidate for the throne, it is indeed inappropriate for me to continue. After the coronation, I shall retreat to my meditations before the Buddha and remove myself from the public eye." She yielded as a ploy to advance. Those present could only kneel and say in unison, "Your Majesty is the matriarch of the realm. You mustn't put your esteemed self down." Xue Shoujuo knelt among them, his back drenched in sweat as he kowtowed. Surprisingly, he did not refute Kong Qiu's proposal. Xiao Qie was bursting with energy after a night's rest. After finishing his breakfast, he sat cross-legged under the eaves, feeding Meng. When Shen Zichuan broke the news that Bianjun had revolted, he and Meng turned their heads to look at him as one. Bianjun revolted, like they're siding against Chudu, and they're not gonna fight Li Bei? Yu Xiaozai knelt off to the side. On seeing this, he said hastily, I was shocked when I heard it too. General Liu comes from a long line of loyal military men. How could he have turned? Minister Kong requested at once that the Ministry of War check on the state of military affairs in Bianjun, while the embroidered uniform guard interrogated the military inspector eunuch sent there. It took nearly a month for them to learn that the provisions Bianjun received during the supply disaster were moldy. Xiao Qie was still stunned. He bolted to his feet, blocking the light inside the room. Moldy. Back then, the instructions were to reduce Qidong's military provisions by half. No one said anything about letting them pass off adulterated grain as quality provisions. The military situation in Libei had been critical at the time, but Bianjun also had to fight Biansha. No matter how anxious Xiao Qie had been over Libei, he would never have let anyone stuff Lu Guangbai's granaries with moldy rice. He had dispatched Chen Yang and Gu Jin to supervise the transport of Libei's grain, precisely because he worried someone would tamper with their provisions again. He had never expected someone would make a move on Bianjun instead. No wonder the marshal has yet to come after me. Xiao Qie raised his arm to let Meng perch there. His expression was grave. If she lost Lu Guangbai, Chu Du wouldn't dare send her north to confront us just yet. She's needed to fill the gap in Bianjun. But Lu Guangbai... This was Lu Guangbai they were talking about. Xiao Qie's heart sank. The 20,000 soldiers in Bianjun are all infantry. If Lu Guangbai went east, there's nowhere to go but the desert. The desert is the Bianxia horsemen's territory. Outside Bianjun, he will lose the advantage of laying ambushes in the terrain. He'll have to change his style of fighting. Why didn't he head for Suotian Pass instead? Either Suotian Pass or Tianfei Watchtower would have been a safer choice. Suotian Pass was manned by troops who belonged to the old Feng clan, and men in both of these places had once fought under Zuo Qianqiu. Zuo Qianqiu was now a general in Libei, and Lu Guangbai's sister, Lu Yizhi, was Xiao Jiming's wife. No one would mistreat him if he went there. Why did he decide to head east? The only thing waiting in the desert was the 12 tribes of Biansha. So, okay. This is more about what Lu Guangbai is doing. The last time we saw Lu Guangbai was a while ago. And I'm trying to remember now what was happening with him exactly. He, like... It kind of seemed like he was giving up. But then he was like, no, like, I'm gonna do this on my own. And I'm thinking, okay, so he went to just deal with the Biansha tribes directly. Unless there's something else going on. Either way, that is the end of the chapter. We are on page 163 for chapter 125, which is called Meng and You. So, Meng the bird and Yu Xiaozai? Henry, so we're thinking someone took control or manipulated the army? I can't even predict anything at this point. But yes, finally more Meng content. By the end of the 6th month, Cizhou's garrison troops were beginning to take shape, and it was time for Xiao Qie to continue his journey north. Not once had he sent a personal letter to Libei in the 2 months he had remained in Zhongbo. Likewise, he had received no letter from his family in Libei. Meng began to spend more and more time out hunting. Xiao Qie knew he was flying north. As he stood in the courtyard watching the sunset, Shen Zichuan rapped lightly on the doorframe behind him. Xiaoqie looked back at him in the last rays of warm light. Xiaoqie seemed to have grown a little taller again, and he was far sturdier than he had been 6 years ago, his broad shoulders bearing the full weight of the sinking sun. Shen Zichuan watched him until Xiaoqie turned slightly aside. "Let's go riding." Unlike the last time he'd suggested riding together in Chudu, Xiaoqie was serious about the horsemanship. That's one way you could put it. He led Shen Zichuan up to Snowcrest and explained everything in great detail, from how to sit on the saddle to how to direct with the reins. It was as if he wanted to leave everything to Shen Zichuan: his horse, his falcon, his heart. The two men rode northward, Shen Zichuan sitting before Xiaoqie in the saddle as they trotted along the forested paths outside the city of Zizhou. They rode until the last of the sun slipped beneath the horizon, and stars adorned the great vault of the night sky above them. The mountains north of the city were lush with vegetation. Snowcrest ran up the nearest slope. Xiaoqie reined in the horse and said to Shen Zichuan through the wind, "The Hongyan Mountains lie just there." Shen Zichuan looked out into the distance. On this cloudy night, the sky stretched out in all directions above them. He could vaguely make out a suggestion of the tall, jagged peaks of the Hongyan Mountains. They looked like a dragon lying at the edge of the horizon, drawing a meandering demarcation line at the very edge of the Zhou Empire. From Zhongbo, its great contours could be seen, but not reached. This mountain range nourished the vast expanse of land north of Great Zhou. It was a natural wall built from the very earth of Libei. Shen Zichuan heard the howl of the wind, a wind entirely unlike the winds of Chudu. It sent the sleeves of his robe fluttering like a white bird spreading its wings. This is the call of the Hongyan Mountains. They miss me too. As we get closer to Libei, we'll be able to hear the song of the wind even more clearly. Xiaoqie spurred Snowcrest into a gallop. They jolted, faces to the wind, shooting across the billows of wild grass, like a bird swooping toward the Hongyan Mountains. Meng flapped his wings and soared after them. He wheeled in the air and swooped down, drawing a dark line through the grass as he swept past. Xiaoqie said in Shen Zichuan's ear, "I want to take you there to see it." The puff of breath from Xiaoqie's lips warmed the little jade earring on Shen Zichuan's ear. Looking out at the horizon, he said, "Xiaozi on." Xiaoqie cocked his head. Shen Zichuan spoke, but the wind snatched the words away. Xiaoqie couldn't hear him clearly. He leaned in closer and motioned for Shen Zichuan to repeat himself. Instead, Shen Zichuan said, "We'll cross the border if we keep going." "Then so be it." Xiaoqie's hands were slack on the reins. "I'm taking you home to meet my old man and elder brother." "What did you say just now?" Shen Zichuan shouted in the wind. "I said, where is my fan?" He scooped Shen Zichuan into his arms and pulled back hard on the reins, sending Snowcrest rearing up with the whinny. The world turned upside down, and Shen Zichuan heard a muffled thud before he felt the impact of the drop. The two men tumbled and rolled in the grass along the slope. Xiaoqie wrapped his arms around Shen Zichuan to shield him from the fall. When they came to a stop, he didn't get up. He remained under Shen Zichuan and spread his arms wide. "You were lying to me." Shen Zichuan pinched his cheek. "When did I lie?" Xiaoqie stared up at Shen Zichuan and huffed. You're lying. Liar. Scoundrel. Heartless cad. Shen Zichuan pulled up a handful of grass and threw it onto Xiaoqia's face. Xiaoqia didn't dodge, but stretched out his arms and embraced Shen Zichuan, holding him tight to his chest as he said wickedly, "Even if I die, I'll die with you." He pressed Shen Zichuan's face into the crook of his own neck. Shen Zichuan struggled, but he couldn't break free. He said in a muffled voice, "Xiao Er, if you suffocate me, you'll be murdering your own husband." "Repeat what you said earlier," Xiaoqia said. Shen Zichuan gasped for air and finally managed to peek out from under Xiaoqia's broad palm. Sweetly, he said, "Xiao Er, you're suffocating." "Shen Zichuan," Xiaoqia hissed resentfully. He rubbed briskly at Shen Zichuan's head until his cheeks were flushed red and his hair was hopelessly tousled, not at all like the composed Vice Commander Shen. Bits of grass stuck in Shen Zichuan's mouth. "Huh?" Xiaoqia cupped Shen Zichuan's cheeks and raised his head to kiss him. Yet just as their lips were about to touch, he stopped and said sternly, "Kiss me." Shen Zichuan was trapped against Xiaoqia's chest with his head tilted up. After enduring it for a moment, he said, "Let me up then." "Nope," Xiaoqia said. "Think of a way yourself." Unable to strain up to reach him, Shen Zichuan pursed his lips, grabbed the front of Xiaoqia's robes, and yanked him over, pecking him on the lips. Xiaoqia's expression remained unchanged. Shen Zichuan was still struggling. So Xiaoqia surged up and kissed him so hard, Shen Zichuan reared back, and his bites were just as merciless as his kiss. Shen Zichuan arced backward with Xiaoqia's arms locked tight around his waist, feeling a stab of pain in his neck from Xiaoqia's canines. He sucked in a breath and narrowed his eyes. In no time at all, the tables had turned, and Shen Zichuan was pressed deep into the grass. He could see the great expanse of the boundless, starry sky as Xiaoqia entered him. Remember when it said that Xiaoqia was serious about them going riding this time? It was like, no, like, it, what did it say? Unlike the last time he suggested riding together, Xiaoqia was serious about the horsemanship. And now we're here. So much for that. Henry, did you predict to... I definitely said that word wrong also. It's tussled? Tussled? I don't even remember how I said it. Is it tussled? Anyway, where the heck were we? He could see the great expanse of the boundless starry sky as Xiaoqia entered him. Small sounds he couldn't suppress escaped his lips. He grabbed a lock of Xiaoqia's hair and wound it tight around his fingers as they tensed and curled. The stars dazzled his eyes before scattering into pieces on the wind. He gazed up at Xiaoqia, a little dizzy, feeling that this wolf pup was much fiercer than usual. "Xiao Er," Shen Zichuan dragged out the syllables. Xiaoqia bent down, enveloping him, blocking out the wind and stars. "I love you." He seemed to have fallen in love with such whisperings lately. The closer he was to home, the more often he acted like a child. He took possession of Shen Zichuan, and was taken by Shen Zichuan in turn. He was not stingy with such declarations of love. Each time he said the words, he felt Shen Zichuan clench hard around him, trembling despite himself. Shen Zichuan sighed and moaned, clinging to Xiaoqia amid fragmented murmurs, as Xiao Jie indulged with wild abandon at the doorstop of Li Bei. Only the two of them knew of the desires to which they surrendered themselves beneath their seemingly intact clothes. With his back to the Hongyan Mountains, amid the enchanting whistles of the wind, Xiao Jie revealed how feral and domineering he could be. Gradually, Shen Zichuan forgot all about the silver river overhead as he kissed Xiao Jie. Xiao Jie's passion sent Shen Zichuan soaring amid the clouds and sinking back into the embrace of the wind, before eventually melting into the waiting cradle of Xiao Jie's arms. Henry. Horsemanship is what the kids are calling it these Ming Dynasty days. Oh, Blue, I think you have a good read on the situation. Serious as in not messing around while on the horse. When Chen Zichuan awoke, day was beginning to break. Thin rays of morning sunlight shone through the gaps in the bamboo blinds. He stretched a hand out and felt the fading warmth on the empty bed beside him. Xiao Jie had gone out of the city, leaving his old robe still hanging on the rack. A small cone of incense burned in the room to repel mosquitoes. The heat from their lovemaking still lingered on Shen Zichuan's skin. For a second, I thought it was going to be like, they just fell asleep on the ground. I wouldn't put it past them. Shen Zichuan spread his arms wide, taking up the space of both of them. Instead of closing his eyes again, he suddenly propped himself up, scrambled into his clothes and wooden clogs, and pushed the door open to the veranda outside. Quick, the redness at the corners of Shen Zichuan's eyes was apparent as he hoarsely told Ding Tao, "Send someone to take the new pair of arm guards to Tse-an before he gets too far." Dispirited at having been left behind, Ding Tao had been sitting cross-legged at the edge of the small pond, drawing in his book to vent his feelings. When he heard Shen Zichuan's voice behind him, he leapt to his feet and started off without even stashing away his brush. The sharp-eyed Chao Tianya deftly caught hold of his collar and said to Shen Zichuan, "The Marquis took them with him." The chill of the morning air had dispelled Shen Zichuan's drowsiness. He clicked his wooden clog lightly against the ground, nodded, and made to return to the room when Chao Tianya added, "But he only took one. He said to keep the other for master." Shen Zichuan stood still for a moment without saying a word. The sun was already up, so he did not intend to return to bed. How many men from the Imperial Army did he leave behind? 2,000, Chao Tianya answered, all at the Beiyuan hunting grounds. Prepare the register of names. The Imperial Army cannot be mixed with the soldiers from Suzhou. Shen Zichuan tugged at the front of his robe. Mr. Chung Feng wanted to discuss the sale and purchase of grain between Suzhou and Chazhou in detail. Go tell him we will discuss it today. Apparently in no rush to leave, Chao Tianya fished out a letter from the front of his robe. "Master, you got a letter from Ge Qingqing and Jueshi." "Excellent timing," Shen Zichuan said. "Is the Shi clan's fleet in the port of Yongyi in good order? Officially, the Shi clan's businesses have nothing to do with us, so any surface-level investigations into our doings oughtn't involve them. Xue Shoujua emptied the coffers of silver, but he left all these lucrative shops to us. I doubt he did so willingly. There are no signs of activity from Chudu. Even if Xue Shoujua's plans are foolproof, he can't be in two places at once. He's got no one to handle those shops in Jueshi for him." Chao Tianya released Ding Tao. Ge Qingqing writes that Chudu wasn't the one who made trouble for him. It was the Yan clan of Hezhou. The Yan clan of Hezhou owned the waterways of Chazhou. They were prominent merchants who operated south of Chudu. Lei Chongming had been able to establish his brigade of bandits only thanks to the Yan clan backing Lei Jingzhe. Shen Zichuan had been thinking about them since learning this, and was not surprised to hear their name now. I know very little about the Yan clan, Shen Zichuan said. It doesn't seem much is known about them in Chudu either. Ding Tao jumped up in excitement. Gongzi, this I know. Lei Jingzhe's backer is the current head of the Yan clan, a man by the name of Yan He-ru. Rumor has it he's a peacock who refuses to go out without a sedan chair worth its weight in gold. He doesn't only dress in gold. Even the abacus he carries with him is made of gold and jade. He's very, very, very rich. In his haste, Ding Tao's words all ran together, so he lifted his little book and showed it to Shen Zichuan. On the page was scrawled a little figure holding an abacus, decked out in copper coins all over, a half-informed sketch of a very wealthy man. Where did you hear all this? Chao Tianya asked. Ding Tao pointed at the direction of the jail. Master brought home a silly kid when they caught all those bandits. He's almost as tall as Jinge, and incredibly strong. I got all this out of him with just a few sweets. He's naive enough that he'll spill everything if you give him some food. Shen Zichuan vaguely remembered Xiao Qian mentioning this youth. Weren't the rest of the bandits sent back? Yeah, Ding Tao nodded. But not him. Master said he doesn't have the brains to survive among the bandits if he returns, so we might as well keep him here with us. Shen Zichuan had more questions about the Yan clan. Bring him here, he said. Zhao Hui fed the falcons at dawn. He held up his arm to them one at a time and let them perch on his arm guard while he fed them meat. Anywhere else, there would be a servant assigned to the muse, but when it came to Xiao Qia's generation, they preferred to do it themselves. They all raised the falcons they had personally tamed. When Zhao Hui fed Yu, Xiao Jiming's falcon. Oh, Yu is the other falcon. And now we know. When Zhao Hui fed Yu, Xiao Jiming's falcon, he discovered that the bird's back had been badly scratched, and there was a bald spot where several feathers had been pulled out. What happened here? Zhao Hui brought Yu closer and pushed aside its feathers for a look. He asked the soldier at his side, "Did it fight something?" The soldier, holding the leather bag of meat strips, walked a few steps beside Zhao Hui. "I couldn't say, General. It went out hunting a few days back, and when it came back from the south, it was wounded like this. I had the medic look at it, and he said those scratches were made by the talons of another bird of prey." Yu was a gerfalcon, and one of the larger birds among the flocks in Libei. Xiao Fengshu had been first to tame it, but he had later given the bird to Xiao Jiming. It had followed Xiao Jiming into battle for the last few years, and never been on the losing end against the Saker falcons of the Hanma tribe. Zhao Hui studied the wound. How strange. Whose falcon is this ferocious? A thought jolted through Zhao Hui's mind, and he whipped his head around to the south. The wind was as strong as ever, but there were no traces of gerfalcons circling in the skies. The sky of Libei was as blue as ever. Now, that's the end of the chapter. Now, is there some situation in which Meng would fight you? Would fight Xiao Jiming's bird? And why? Question mark? Like, is that what we're implying here? I don't know how I feel about that. It's 3:50. I'm gonna go ahead and take about a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we will be on page 173 for chapter 126, Li Xiong. Oh, Henry, the Hanma tribe. A bird belonging to the Hanma tribe. That makes far more sense. Right? I was a little thrown off for a second. It's probably a Hanma tribe bird. So yeah, I will be back in 10. Hello, I am back. Henry, I love what you just said. Well, basically at the beginning of the break or before the break, I zero in on any possibility of further hunks, much like a bird of prey. It sounds accurate. So, yeah, I kind of don't know what's happening with Xiao Jiming's bird getting attacked, but I don't like the sound of it. But right now, we're on chapter 126, which is called Li Xiong. And I had questions about who Li Xiong is. So I'm really curious what we're going to find out about him. Henry, I just saw your message. You're welcome. So, if I didn't say it already, we're on page 173 for chapter 126. Li Xiong was just as his name suggested, a bear cub. By this point, he'd been in the prison nearly half a month, spending his days sitting cross-legged with his face to the bars, looking helplessly at the door as he waited for Lei Jingjie to come for him. Due to his youth, the jailers all loved to gently tease him. He was a strong but simple boy who was slow to anger even when prodded, but he had a terrifying appetite and could eat a meal meant for 3 in one sitting. When the jailer opened the cell door, a shackled Li Xiong asked urgently, "Has my doggo come to get me?" The warden clapped Li Xiong on the back but said nothing. Chao Tianya had arranged for a horse carriage to pick Li Xiong up. Fearing the boy might stir up trouble on the way, the jailer made a special point of securing the fetters around Li Xiong's ankles. Li Xiong was not used to riding in the carriage, and all the swaying made him dizzy. Finally it stopped, but when he got out and saw the entrance of the manor, he refused to move his feet. "I'm not going in." Li Shang stood in place like a stake nailed into the ground. No matter how they pushed and shoved him, he wouldn't budge an inch. This place is too big. Daga won't be able to find me if I go inside. The heat today was oppressive, and everyone was sweating profusely just standing there. The jailer, overcome with anxiety at the prospect of offending his higher-ups, attempted to hoodwink Li Shang. Go in for now, and we'll bring you out in a little while. Li Shang thought this man, with his weasel-like eyes that shifted from side to side when he spoke, looked like a liar. He shook his head sullenly, and refused to take a step forward. After trying to persuade him again to no avail, the jailer steeled himself and squeezed in with the others to push at Li Shang's back in an attempt to heave him inside by force. The youth's heels scraped across the ground. Annoyed at the pushing, Li Shang squared his shoulders and bellowed, "I'm not going in. Nope." Startled, the men behind him flinched back a step. The jailer saw him flailing and worried his shackles wouldn't hold. He barked out, "Hold him down. Don't let him make a scene out here." Li Shang saw them lunging toward him and reacted instinctively. He took a wide-legged stance, making himself as steady as a mountain, while his sun-tanned face contorted with fury. The jailer grabbed him and strained to the limit to push him forward, but Li Shang didn't budge in the slightest. It seemed they were going to be late, unable to even get past the entrance. At this moment, Ji Gong happened to return from his stroll with a bird cage in hand and Fei Sheng at his side. Even from afar, he saw the crowd at the gates and the horse carriage parked in the middle of the road. Approaching with the hand tucked behind his back, he was about to inquire when he heard the collective shout of alarm as Li Shang threw all of the guards off in a single motion, flinging them to the ground. What strength, Fei Sheng marveled, watching Ji Gong's expression. As a practitioner of Ji-style boxing, Ji Gong valued strength above all. Sure enough, his eyes lit up. Where's this boy from? Fei Sheng had already guessed upon seeing the escort of jailers. He hurried over, gripping the Xiaochun saber at his waist, but released it almost immediately. Instead, he kicked the chain on the ground up into his hand and called, "Out of the way. I'll show you boys how it's done." Shen Zichuan was inside waiting for Kong Ling and the others when he heard the commotion out in the courtyard. Lifting the bamboo blinds, he couldn't help his astonishment when he saw Ji Gong. "Shifu, what's wrong?" Ji Gong handed his bird cage to Chao Tianya and gestured for him to hang it under the eaves, then bent over to scoop a handful of water from the copper basin to wash his hands. "Found a boy outside. Take a look. Is he the one you want?" As he spoke, Fei Sheng came in, pulling on an iron chain as if hauling in a bull. At the end was a sturdy boy. Still angry, the boy grabbed the chain and yanked Fei Sheng back toward him. Fei Sheng might have been an assistant commander of the embroidered uniform guard, but his clothes were already drenched in sweat from dragging the boy the short distance from the gate. "Oh." Ding Tao poked his head out from the room and yelled, "That's him, Li Shang." "What's going on?" Shen Zichuan asked. Before Fei Sheng could answer, the chain went taut, and his entire body jerked backward. Li Shang pulled at the chain, struggling so hard cracks appeared on his wooden shackles as he dragged Fei Sheng around the courtyard. Fei Sheng's back scraped across the beds of flowers, and mud splattered over his neck. He'd hoped to put on a display of his prowess, but discovered he couldn't get his feet under him. Chao Tianya tensed, but before he could move, Ji Gong threw out an arm to stop him and bellowed, "Taozi." Ding Tao stuffed his little book into his robe and vaulted over the veranda railing. Fei Sheng was still dragging on the ground. Ding Tao sprinted a few steps to catch up to them. Knowing he couldn't stop Li Shang, he stepped down on the chain and instead yelled, "Li Shang." He slipped, catching his foot in the chain. The moment Li Xiong tugged, it threw Ding Tao backward. Quick-witted, Ding Tao threw up his arms to protect his head and shielded his cheeks with his elbows as he tumbled into the soft soil. Flower stems stabbed into his forearm as he rolled, only blocked by the dog-hide arm guard he had just secured on himself. Fei Sheng hooked his foot around the edge of a large rock to anchor himself, but he could feel the sharp pain from the chain tightening around his arm. Gritting his teeth, he sprang to his feet and pulled until his entire body was leaning backward, legs planted in a low crouch for balance. Veins bulged on his arms, and he couldn't help cussing. This damned bare strength. Ding Tao flipped back to his feet and, taking a running start, leapt into the air. Kicking against the railing to propel himself forward, he pounced on Li Xiong's back. He grabbed Li Xiong's back collar with one hand, clamped his legs around Li Xiong's neck, and raised a fist. But he didn't strike him, instead shouting, "Let go!" The impact of Ding Tao landing on his shoulders threw Li Xiong off balance. Flexing his knees to stabilize himself, he dropped the chain and reached back with one hand to dislodge Ding Tao, but was encumbered by the shackles. Enraged, he whipped his upper body around in an attempt to fling Ding Tao off. Ding Tao clung like a monkey, but the book in his robe slipped out. Ding Tao's greatest skill was Qigong, which had been imparted to him by his old man himself. Members of his family worked as guards in Li Bei, and they always brought a notebook along on the job to record every incident, regardless of significance. This book was more important to them than their own lives. In order to hold on to his book on the battlefield, Ding Tao's old man became a master of Qigong, perfecting a life-saving technique specifically developed for escape. It was a pity his father had eventually had his throat slit while chasing after his own little book. Flustered at the loss of his notebook, Ding Tao reached out to catch it. Li Xiong grabbed his outstretched arm and flung the smaller boy over his shoulder, throwing him onto the ground like a fish he had pulled from a stream. Ding Tao slammed down with a thud, in so much pain he couldn't make a sound. Even so, he swiftly caught hold of the book with his feet, as Li Xiong clutched his collar and lifted him off the ground. Too preoccupied to worry about injury, Ding Tao tossed the book up and caught it with one hand before he was slammed to the ground again. This time, Li Xiong knocked the wind out of him. Ding Tao choked, feeling bile rise in his throat. He kicked out his legs and locked them around Li Xiong's shoulders, using the momentum to pull himself up and fling Li Xiong to the ground. Li Xiong's shackles broke from the impact. He rolled to his feet, his eyes bulging as he charged at Ding Tao with the fist raised high. Yet his fist suddenly encountered an immense resistance, as if he had struck a steel plate. He was unable to discharge even an ounce of his astonishing strength. Qigong, holding Li Xiong's fist in one hand, commanded, "Back." Li Xiong's legs didn't seem to obey him as he was pushed several steps back by this white-haired old man. Unable to maintain his newly regained balance, he fell back on his rear end. Qigong shook out his sleeves and pulled Ding Tao up from the ground. Ding Tao stuffed the book back under his robes. "Grandpa Ji, he hurt me so bad." "I told you a long time ago, you're going to get yourself in trouble if you rely on trickery and evasive tactics." Qigong dusted off Ding Tao's back. "When you jumped on him earlier, you should have used right in the bullseye on him. Why did you hesitate?" Ding Tao wiped sweat off his face, aggrieved. "He ate the sweets I gave him, and we were still calling each other brothers yesterday." Chao Tianya folded his arms over his chest, leaning against the pillar, and whistled at Fei Sheng. "That's how it's done, is it, Lao Fei?" Fei Sheng stripped off his filthy outer robe and gave him a smile full of teeth. "Son of a bitch, why don't you try?" This kid's strength is out of this world. Shen Zichuan was surprised himself. Xiao Jie was the strongest person he knew. He could draw the 100-caddy conqueror bow without help, relying on his own arm strength alone. Xiao Jie could hoist him absently over one shoulder while mounting a horse or fording a river. But even Xiao Jie had not been this frightening at Li Xiong's age. Jigong pulled Ding Tao behind him, took a few steps forward, and asked Li Xiong, "Which one of your parents is from Biansha?" Li Xiong's butt was still sore from his fall. His shackles had fallen away, but the fetters on his feet were still there. He had been reluctant to come inside in the first place. Then Fei Sheng's treatment had sparked his rage, and Jigong had beaten him back. Now, seeing Ding Tao slinking back under the eaves, with no shortage of people to console him, his mouth wobbled and he threw his head back in a wail, kicking his legs as he cried, "Why are you all bullying me?" Shen Zichuan let his hands relax and said to Jigong, "He's still a child." Jigong observed Li Xiong's back and shoulders. He was fighting haphazardly earlier, relying on brute force. It looked more like wrestling than anything. "Lad, tell me honestly, is one of your parents from Biansha?" Li Xiong ignored Jigong. Nothing anyone said registered through his despairing cries. He had been following at Lei Jingzhe's heels since he was a child, and without him, Li Xiong was like a toddler abandoned on the streets, lost and helpless, with no one to lean on. His wailing was giving Shen Zichuan a headache. He hadn't slept well the night before, and found long periods of standing tiring. "Give him some more of your sweets," he told Ding Tao. Ding Tao pouted. He felt around his sleeve pocket for some time. He felt around his sleeve pocket for some time before finally digging out an oil paper packet. They're melted. Chao Tianya picked up a branch of blossoms that had fallen to the ground and held it between his teeth as he grinned at Li Xiong. He stepped over the railing and squatted down before him, waving his hands placatingly. "Guga will remove these fetters and get someone to bring you some food. Do you want rice or noodles?" Li Xiong hiccuped, his chin glistening with snot as he sniffled. "I want meat." The bamboo blinds were partially lifted, letting in a breeze that cooled the room. Li Xiong sat cross-legged before the small table, eating with his hands and chewing his meat with great relish. Ding Tao silently counted the plates, feeling he might get full just from looking. His mother is most likely a woman the Biansha horsemen abducted. It's always been chaos along the banks of the Chasha River, and such things were common occurrences before the fall of Zhongbo. The Duanzhou garrison troops were reluctant to cross the border to give chase. Jigong studied Li Xiong with a sidelong look. But with an extraordinary physique like his father must be no ordinary person. I wonder how he fell into the bandits' hands. If he really has Biansha blood, it's not strange that he would be abandoned. Shen Zichuan recalled Li Xiong's earlier display of strength. Chudu keeps annual records of all those reported abducted at the frontiers, and the highest numbers are always reported in Duanzhou. If those abducted women fall pregnant, and the Biansha tribes are unwilling to raise the child, the women will be thrown back across the Chasha River. At that point, their birth families don't want to take them back either. Fei Sheng had returned after changing into clean robes. Seeing that Chao Tianya remained silent, he said, "Him falling into the bandits' hands by chance is the best-case scenario. The fear is that the bandits raised him all this time for a specific purpose." "Unlikely." Jigong shook his head slightly. "You've never seen the Biansha people. They're just like us. Not everyone can grow that big and tall. Look at the Libe armored cavalry. Aside from the household registration requirement, they also required their recruits to have the physique of a soldier. But still, not everyone is as strong as the Prince of Libe. I doubt this lad's father is any common tribesman. If he's anything like his son, he'll hold some titled position within the Biansha horsemen by dint of his strength alone. I can't think of anyone that fits the description among the Biansha generals I know near Zhongbo. Okay, kid, said Chao Tianya between sips of chilled soup. You've had your meat. Time for you to talk. Li Xiong was still chewing, his mouth too occupied to reply. His gaze swept over the group gathered around him before finally coming to rest on Shen Zichuan, and he mumbled something around his meat. Ding Tao leaned in and listened carefully, then turned to Shen Zichuan. Gongzi, he's asking why you're wearing an earring. He turned back to Li Xiong. Gongzi is wearing it because he wants to. What are you asking this for? Oh, you've seen the same one before. Not the same? So is it the same or not? Uh-huh. Well, Gongzi's jade earring wasn't bought with money. What do you mean you've seen it before? Li Xiong swallowed. Without bothering to wipe his mouth, he looked at Shen Zichuan and said, I've seen your face before, at Gadal, on the Chasha River. What? Huh? What does it mean? What do you mean? That's the end of the chapter. We're on chapter 127 on page 183, and that's called Vulture. Great, promising chapter title. And yeah, I was gonna say Henry, he was at the Chasha sinkhole, but he didn't have the earring then. So, what? Blue, you'll love to see us all getting into the role. Yeah, I can't say that I haven't been, like, my speaking hasn't been influenced by watching Britney streams. But yeah, what the heck does this mean? Okay. Jigong jolted to his feet. Nonsense. Although Jigong had subdued Li Xiong, the boy was not afraid of him. It isn't, he said resolutely. I've seen him before. There's a portrait of him in Godal. Daga used to live there. I remember it. A portrait? To Fei Sheng, this did not augur well. He was keenly aware that he was not yet Shen Zichuan's trusted subordinate. There were some matters he was not at liberty to hear. He got to his feet. Looks like he's almost done. Master, I'll tell the kitchen they don't need to cook any more meat. Once Fei Sheng withdrew, Shen Zichuan asked Jigong to sit before turning to Li Xiong. Think carefully. Are you sure the portrait was of me? Li Xiong pinched the handkerchief he used to wipe his mouth in 2 fingers and scrutinized Shen Zichuan for a moment. It kind of looked like you, he answered hesitantly, but also kind of not. Shen Zichuan felt something click in his mind. He pushed his spoon around his soup and lowered his eyes. The portrait you saw was of a woman, yes? Ah, right. It finally dawned on Li Xiong. That portrait was of a woman. You're a man. In one moment, Shen Zichuan made several conjectures. He watched the sour plums swimming through the chilled soup under his spoon, and thought back to what Zhou Gui had said not long ago. He thought of his mother, Bai Cha, and the bandit, Lei Jingzhe, who had just returned to Dunzhou. Without batting an eye, Shen Zichuan asked, What kind of place is Readalong? Well, Readalong lies on the east bank of the Chasha River, Tantaihu said, scanning the horizon. It's part of Biansha's territory. In the early days, it was a temporary refuge for bandits to hide from the Zhongbo garrison troops. Later, when the bandits started trafficking women from decent families, my elder brother, Tantai led the joint garrison troops of 2 prefectures to wipe the settlement out. The remaining bandits defected to the Biansha horsemen, specifically the Liao Ying tribe, who used to roam there back then. You know, I was wondering about the earring. I feel like it's just a coincidence. Like, maybe they're just similar looking earrings. Maybe it's just like, oh, you look like this woman in a portrait who is wearing earrings. I'm gonna guess that's it. The remaining bandits defected to the Biansha horsemen, specifically the Liao Ying tribe, who used to roam there back then. Tantaihu looked up and watched Meng pierce the layers of clouds. That's where Lei Jingzhe comes in. That's where Lei Jingzhe comes from. After leaving the Zhu family, he had nowhere to go. He thought he might join the Zhongbo bandits and make his fortune, so he went to Readalong. But for whatever reason, he failed to establish himself there, and eventually returned to Duanzhou, where he met Lei Changming and started to make his mark. Chen Yang squatted on the ground and kneaded a handful of dry soil. It's because after Tantai Long wiped out the Readalong bandits, the Liao Ying tribe moved north. The bandits who had defected followed them up. The Liao Ying tribe now acts as the reserve cavalry of the Hanma tribe. All the soccer falcons of the Biansha people are trained and kept by the Liao Ying tribe. At first, their status among the 12 tribes of Biansha was quite low. They were regarded as nothing more than servants who looked after the falcons. But 20 years ago, an Esuhuri appeared among the Liao Ying tribe. Tantaihu was not from Li Bei, and did not know the implication of this title. From beside them, Gu Jin explained, "It means hero." Chen Yang looked back and smiled at Tantaihu. You know how Biansha is made up of many different tribes? Only tribes where Esuhuri have appeared can count as one of the main 12. Coincidentally, our Prince of Li Bei and this Esuhuri were both born the same year. His lordship established the Li Bei armored cavalry at Luoxia Pass, while this hero conquered the 3 tribes of Liao Ying. Hanma tribe in the north, the 3 tribes of Liao Ying, Guoshi, and Changjiu in the desert. I completely emphasized that wrong. The 3 tribes of Liao Ying, Guoshi, and Changjiu in the desert, and defeated the old chief of the Hanma tribe in the north with the use of soccer falcons. From then on, he became the one and only great Esuhiri to command these 4 tribes since the reign of Yongyi and Li Bei's archenemy. Tantaihu gave a start. Don't tell me it's... Behind them, Xiaoqie turned his face to the sky and emptied the water skin into his mouth. As he secured the lid, he confirmed, "Amour." They made way for him, and Xiaoqie stepped forward onto the upturned earth to gaze at the Hongyan Mountains in the distance. Amour is currently the man most likely to become the great king of Biansha. He has the ambition to subdue the 12 tribes. His tall nose cast a shadow across his face when he turned to look at them. He created the strongest cavalry in Biansha, and has encroached farther into Great Zhou's territory than anyone in history. Lao Hu, the Biansha horseman you see today, have actually been reformed by Amor. He combined the strengths of the Gosha tribe's horses with the Liao Ying tribe's Sakar falcons. By switching to Gosha tribe's ponies, he decreased the height of Hanma tribe's mounts as he increased their speed, forming an army that would allow him to fight Li Bei in the air as well as on the ground. He decreased their height. Tantai Hu looked at Snowcrest. Master, are the battle steeds in Li Bei different from those of Hanma tribe? Of course they're different. Xiao Jie chuckled, but his smile was faint. At first, in order to keep up with the Hanma tribe's speed, my father set up new stables at Luoxia Pass, instead of bringing battle steeds over from Suotian Pass. That's when they started breeding the current battle steeds of the Li Bei armored cavalry. They were all originally wild horses from the foot of the Hongyan Mountains, strong and muscular, the same breed the Hanma tribe once used. But Amor realized the drawbacks of this line before anyone else. He thought even though they were the same breed, the Li Bei armored cavalry's horses could bear more weight. But if the Li Bei armored cavalry shed their armor, the Hanma tribe's speed would no longer be an advantage. So he abandoned the Hanma tribe's stables in the Hongyan Mountains and swapped his battle steeds for ponies from the Gosha tribe. Snowcrest shook its mane and paced a few steps around Xiao Jie as it munched on grass. Those ponies have made us suffer quite a bit. Chen Yang held his hand out flat, indicating the height of the animals for Tantai Hu. The Gosha tribe's horses caught the Li Bei armored cavalry off guard. Tantai Hu still didn't understand. He had served in the garrison in Dongzhou, and then in the Imperial Army, but neither of them relied on cavalry as their main forces. He couldn't see what was so formidable about some ponies. They're astonishingly fast. Xiao Jie's eyes grew flinty as he recalled the fleeting glimpse he'd caught of them many years before. Those horses were fierce and strong. Although they're on the smaller side, they have great endurance. The Gosha tribe has been fighting battles with the Bianjun Commandery for years. Outsiders don't understand. They think Lu Guangbai doesn't live up to his name and isn't worthy of being ranked as one of the 4 great generals in the land. But if you put them in his position, they would know after a single skirmish that his infantrymen haven't been hassling any ordinary cavalry on those night raids. This is the fastest cavalry in the world. Qidong has guarded the south for decades, with troops many times the size of the Gosha tribes. Yet they've never managed to weaken them, simply because they can't catch up. This is also the reason Chudu keeps a tight leash on Lu Guangbai's troops. When the Gosha tribe appeared in the grasslands of Li Bei, they nearly crushed the newly formed Li Bei armored cavalry. After the Hanma tribe changed to these faster horses, the heavy armor my father introduced put the slower Li Bei armored cavalry at the mercy of their scimitars. To solve this problem, my father chose to pile on more weight, turning the Li Bei armored cavalry into a moving iron wall. Facing into the strong wind stirring the grassland, Xiao Jie lost himself in thought. Lao Hu, the reason the Bianxia horsemen were able to fight their way through Zhongbo 6 years ago had everything to do with Amor's change of battle steeds. If they had continued to use the wild horses from the foot of the Hongyan Mountains, they wouldn't have had the stamina to get as far as they did. These newer horses are fast, but they're also tough. They don't slow at all when crossing the desert. Paired with the Sakar falcons acting as reconnaissance, they were a catastrophe waiting to befall the Zhongbo garrison troops. This was something that had kept Xiao Jie tossing and turning at night after the fall of Zhongbo. When he had fought alongside Xiao Jiming as a youth in Li Bei, the Hanma tribe's tactics had been deeply impressed upon him. He had pondered more than once what he might have done in his father's position, faced with such strong enemies, other than increase his cavalry's weight. He had looked forward to seeing his elder brother's strategy. Xiao Jiming's answer had been to thin down the Li Bei armored cavalry's armor and enhance their mobility. Yet still, Xiao Jie was not satisfied. He had the greed of a wolf. He valued the speed of his brother's troops, but he couldn't stand to give up the Li Bei armored cavalry's unique advantage. This was not a problem he could solve with imagination alone. That was why, before entering Chudu all those years ago, Xiao Jie had chosen to first accompany the army south to witness the aftermath of the slaughter in Zhongbo with his own eyes. It was on that journey that he had first seen Lu Guangbai's infantry in action. I can't catch up with them. They're too fast. 6 years ago, Lu Guangbai had squatted on the ground and drawn a map for Xiao Jie. But the Bianjun commandery is still pretty good. Our beacon towers stretch on for hundreds of miles and transmit news quickly. At night, we're like a pocket. As long as we manage to cinch that narrow opening closed, our enemies can't enter and exit as they please. When any of their company falls behind, no matter how fast those ponies are, the Biansha horsemen will end up headless chickens. Zuo Qianqiu had once instructed him thus: "Ah yeah, any attack is an opportunity to defend, and any defense is a means to attack." Tianfei Watchtower stood firm all those years, not because of my skill as a commanding general, but because the heavens bestowed upon Tianfei Watchtower a strong geographical advantage. Tianfei Watchtower must take a defensive stance. Once our troops leave the walls, we can't stand up to the Biansha horsemen's assaults. I was a general who cowered behind city gates. The only army that can pit themselves offensively against the 12 tribes of Biansha is the Li Bei armored cavalry. I told your father endless times never to let the Li Bei armored cavalry lose its edge and become a mere shield. Should that day come, our great Zhou will have lost its spear completely. If you become a general one day, remember the balance of opportunities and strategies. On the battlefield, things can change in the blink of an eye. The moment you allow your opponent to control the rhythm of battle, you will lose all your advantages. You must learn to be patient, but you must seize your opportunities firmly when they come. Sometimes, landing a perfunctory, painless blow will only exhaust you and your forces. You must strike where it hurts. But it seemed nearly impossible. Xiao Jie had yet to think up a solution better than what his father and brother had come up with. He couldn't engage in guerrilla tactics in Li Bei the way Lu Guangbai did in Bianjun. Still, he never forgot Zuo Qianqiu's warning. He agreed wholeheartedly that the Li Bei armored cavalry couldn't be reduced to a mere shield. They had to also be a spear. They hadn't come this far, undergoing countless refinements, simply to bask in bygone glory. In Xiao Jie's eyes, it was easy to beat back the Biansha horsemen time and time again, but a much bigger challenge to beat back Amor. The Biansha horsemen had grown stronger and stronger under Amor's command. This man had the final say over the 4 tribes he ruled. He didn't have to worry about watching his back. He was a vulture, born in the desert, eyeing the Zhou Empire like a piece of meat as he unrelentingly attempted to invade it. When Xiao Fengshu made changes to the Li Bei armored cavalry, Amor responded by changing the Hanma tribe. When Xiao Jiming made changes to the Li Bei armored cavalry again, Amor again changed the Hanma tribe. He had an uncanny understanding of the wolves. There was a certain intimacy in this. He understood the Li Bei armored cavalry better than most of those from Li Bei themselves. I'm not side-eyeing that at all. The Hongyan Mountains blocked Xiaoqia's gaze, just as his father and eldest brother had always stood between Xiaoqia and their enemies. Xiaoqia had not yet gone head-to-head with Amor, but he understood that this was the opponent he must defeat at all costs. Amor was a wise vulture, well-versed in the ways of the world, while Xiaoqia was still an exiled wolf pup, embarking on his journey home. Meng swooped down, bringing with him a gust of wind that whipped across the guards' faces. He landed on Xiaoqia's shoulder, the fresh blood on his sharp talons leaving rough red streaks behind. He had exceeded the size everyone expected of him as a fledgling, and now the only one able to hold him up was Xiaoqia. And Shen Zichuan, with whom Meng was particularly gentle. Xiaoqia collected his runaway thoughts and waved Chenyang off when he moved to fetch the leather feed bag. He turned to look at Meng and commented, "He has already hunted his fill." Meng was acting strangely today. He stared up at the sky with a sharp, penetrating gaze, never once shifting his eyes, even when Xiaoqia stroked his feathers. Xiaoqia followed his gaze out into the distance. All was quiet between earth and sky. The sharp wind springing out of the grass was like the strike of a long serpent. Before the snake could open its bloody maw, Meng took to the air again and tore through the wind to snatch up a Sakar falcon attempting to extricate itself from the grass. Meng rose rapidly into the air as the other bird flapped and struggled in his talons. By the time he brought the Sakar falcon before Xiaoqia, the lone aerial scout had become a bloody mess of mangled flesh. Xiaoqia swung up astride his horse. Reins firmly in hand, he surveyed his surroundings, his gaze finally landing on the eastern horizon. He frowned. He had just entered Li Bei's territory. He hadn't even reached the Li Bei relay station. How could a Sakar falcon of the Biansha tribes appear here? Drums. Gujin raised his head and turned to face the wind. "Master, it's coming from the east." "That's border camp. They mostly run patrols. They have a road that leads right to the northeast provisions trail." Chenyang swiftly mounted as well. As he lifted his riding crop, he turned back in horror. To the east of border camp is 3rd Sand Camp, where his lordship the prince rotates his frontline troops. Border camp keeps reserve battle steeds ready to be sent to the battlefields up north. Had the Biansha horsemen encroached so far west? Then what about 3rd Sand Camp? And what of the Prince of Li Bei? Xiaoqia gripped the reins and spurred his horse into a gallop. Great. Awesome. That's cool. So, hold on. I need to see how many chapters I was reading today. Yeah, okay. This is the last chapter of the day. Chapter 128 on page 193. And it's unfortunately called Enemy Attack. Border Camp was an important supply site near the border of Li Bei. To maintain the physical strength of the frontline forces, Xiao Jiming set up the 3 sand camps, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, in succession on the southeastern side of Li Bei, which acted as defensive barriers for Border Camp. Border Camp was stocked year-round with military provisions and equipment ready for supply to the front lines. There were stables there as well, with battle steeds on standby to replace those who fell in battle. Dawn had yet to break when Wu Ziyu awoke. He squatted at the entrance of his tent and gestured for his personal guard to pour water over his head. "The fighting at the front line is too intense. We start running the moment we open our eyes, and barely lie down before we close them again. It's been half a month since I last bathed. The guard handed him a handkerchief, which he used to wipe his face. Let's make sure we eat well for the next 2 days. We'll have to head north on the 3rd to replace Guo Wei Li's men. The Biansha Baldies already took Readalong banner. This war has come to our doorstep. Wu Ziyu was the youngest of the current generals in Li Bei. He had initially been a guard in the prince's manor, but after a particular incident in which he'd gone drinking and stirred up trouble, Xiao Jiming had dismissed him from his post and booted him into the military. He wasn't a great warrior, but he was resourceful when it came to transporting supplies and allocating provisions. When Li Bei had lacked grain in early spring, he had swindled some from the bandits in Zhongbo, resolving the most pressing emergency for the battlefields. When Chen Yang had escorted the grain from Huaizhou to Li Bei, Wu Ziyu was the one who received him. The young general had been working under Xiao Fengshu for the last 2 months, running this way and that until his legs were about to fall off. The soldiers under his command were exhausted, but now, finally, it seemed it was border camp's turn to take a break. The guard took Wu Ziyu's dirty handkerchief and washed it in the basin. I thought it'd be a breeze to drive off the Hanma tribe with his lordship the prince here. Who would have known it would only become harder the more we fought? Our front line has already been pushed back almost all the way to First Sand Camp. If this continues, Border Camp itself will have to be moved back. Bare-chested, Wu Ziyu wiped his neck with the damp handkerchief and looked eastward. If Border Camp retreats, the heir's defensive layout in the southeast will all be laid to waste. This place is the bedrock that enables the 3 camps to our east to keep up the fight. We can't afford to lose it. The guard picked up the basin and dumped out the water. We can't play the long game either. Besides the soldiers, there are also military craftsmen in these camps who need to eat. If the second young master had remained in Chudu as the Marquis of Dingdu, instead of rebelling, we might have gone on like this for a while longer. But now that he offed the emperor, Jueshi won't supply us with provisions, and the reserve supplies stored along the northeast provisions trail won't last us for long. I feel like I have to sneeze, but it's not happening. But also, I can see how Li Bei would have some issues with Xiaoqia at the moment, if that's really what they believe happened. Wu Ziyu covered his face with the kerchief and squinted up at the sky through the dripping water, listening to the guard griping without responding. The guard set the basin aside. General, how about steamed buns and milk tea for breakfast? The milk is good stuff. They just brought it from back home. It can't be stored long. We have to drink it as soon as possible. I'll tell the cook to pour some strong tea over the clotted cream. Wu Ziyu raised a finger, signaling for quiet. He listened to the hubbub of splashing water and footsteps all around, and looked up at the sky, but did not hear the whistle of today's falcon patrol. He was quiet a moment longer, then asked, "Have last night's patrolmen returned?" The guard was rinsing his feet with water. At this, he too looked up at the sky. It's too early. It'll be well into the morning by the time they circle back from Third Sand Camp. Why don't I hear the whistles from the Falcon Patrol? Didn't let them out. The guard hesitated. We were too tired when we got back to camp last night, so they didn't report to you immediately. The Falcons all came back wounded. They were brutally clawed by the Biansha horsemen's Sakar falcons in battle, and several died. Even Ho fell. Everyone who raises falcons treasures their babies. Since we're back here, they called off the falcon patrols for today, and had the medic tend to their injuries. Falcons were not easy to keep. Taming them was a significant exercise in patience, and the ones that could act as scouts were the cream of the crop. Although they were not gerfalcons, they were just as valuable. The recent battles Xiao Fengshu had fought at the front line were not going smoothly for the soldiers nor for the birds. In Libei, the horses and falcons were close compatriots, and their bonds with the armored cavalry were deep. The men grew upset when either were injured. Wu Ziyu pulled the kerchief off his face and brought his fingers to his mouth to whistle. A falcon swooped down from the top of the tent. As Wu Ziyu was bare-chested, the bird did not land on him, instead hopping onto the drying pole where their clothes hung. "Release Che here," he said. "We're in the middle of a war. Foregoing the sky patrol is the same as losing an eye. Even in border camp, we can't be careless." "But General, Che has been patrolling the battlefield for half a month. What choice do we have?" Wu Ziyu had a gruff voice, yet when he looked up at his falcon, he was gentle as he urged, "Go." Che spread its wings and sprang into the sky. It circled border camp a few times, then soared into the sunrise. Wu Ziyu ducked back into the tent. "The battle steeds we brought back from the front lines should be switched out too. We need to bring the reserve horses north in 3 days. The Hanma tribe breached Guo Weili's defenses at Readalong Banner. Many of our brothers were killed, and quite a number of horses were lost in the swamp. He sent 3 military reports to hurry us along. He's in urgent need of new horses." The barefooted guard slipped on his shoes and fell into step behind him. "I've already had some men prepare the horses, but this group is the last. Any new battle steeds from back home won't arrive until autumn." "I'll talk to him about it." Wu Ziyu dressed briskly. Guo Weili had been personally promoted by Xiao Jiming. He was good on the field, but the heir was the one who knew how to use him best. When Guo Weili let the rush of battle go to his head, Xiao Jiming was like an iron chain that could rein him back, preventing their main forces from suffering heavy losses. Because of this, Xiao Jiming was also the one Guo Weili was most willing to listen to. Now that the commander-in-chief was Xiao Fengshu, Guo Weili's style was less effective. With no one to rein him in, there were plenty of situations where he had ended up twisting in the wind. Wu Ziyu had returned from the front lines with a batch of equipment that needed repair. The Libei armored cavalry went through a tremendous amount of equipment and relied heavily on their supplies and gear. They retained over 10,000 military craftsmen, split up between the various camps. After every battle, these craftsmen were responsible for repairing equipment for the armored cavalry, working day and night. His own armor was badly worn. As the morning wore on, Wu Ziyu stopped by the craftsman's tent to check on the progress of the repair. On the way, he asked the guard about his falcon several times, but there was no news of Che's return. By noon, the sparks flying out of the furnaces made it so hot inside the tent that it was hard to breathe. The weather was stifling, the kind of heat that made one long to lie down. Even the wind was hot. Wu Ziyu sweated profusely as he looked down at the ground in thought. Several of the craftsmen were already suffering from heat stroke. Wu Ziyu instructed his men to cool themselves down with splashes of cold water, but it was like trying to douse a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. Entirely futile. Wu Ziyu sat for a moment and covered his face with a wet handkerchief. "Get the mess cooks to whip up some mung bean soup to cool these men. Have them make as much as they can. The equipment repair can't be delayed. Our brothers on the front lines are riding into battle in worn-out armor." The guard nodded in acknowledgement. He'd foregone his armor altogether in the heat, and his collar was wide open. He was about to turn when he felt a few drops of water falling on his face and wondered aloud, is it raining? Wu Ziyu's nape was wet too, but the drops felt sticky. He looked up and saw Che's silhouette block out the blazing sun before suddenly diving downward. Halfway to the ground, two soccer falcons swooped out from midair and grasped hold of Che before soaring aloft once more. Che opened its beak in a shrill cry as the two birds tore at it, its feathers scattering in the air. Wu Ziyu surged to his feet. Someone atop the watchtower in the distance was already shouting, "Enemy attack!" The drums sounded, each beat pounding through Wu Ziyu's chest. He gave his commands without hesitation. Armor on. This is an attack from the Liao Ying tribe, not Hanma cavalry. Don't panic. The tent flaps lifted in unison as the Libe armored cavalry carried out his orders without a hitch. They dressed and donned their armor with swift and orderly movements, gradually turning from individuals into men of iron and steel, encased within the oppressive weight of the heavy armor. Squadron 6, guard the stables. Squadron 3, granary. If the vanguard I'm leading falls in battle, border camp is bound to fall. If you see that the situation is critical, don't wait. Open the stables and lead the craftsmen down the bridleway toward the northeast provisions trail. Don't stop until you reach the Liuyang camps under Zhao Hui's command. Even as Wu Ziyu spoke, he saw that Che had fallen to the ground. That shocking mass of crimson made him pause. He quickly turned aside and hauled his guard up from the ground. If border camp falls, the horses and the craftsmen can retreat, but the grain can't. If you have to, burn it all. Don't leave even a single grain of rice to the Liao Ying tribe. Head back home and report to the heir. I know, Blue. To think that an hour ago, we were dying from fluff. What happened? Military wisdom dictated that, in an unfavorable situation like this, the general should retreat with the troops and leave the rear guard behind to stall for time. But Wu Ziyu knew this sneak attack would be a force to be reckoned with. If the Bianshao horsemen had bypassed 3rd Sand Camp's defenses, there were two possibilities. The first was that they had skirted around 3rd Sand Camp and crept their way over in silence. The second was that Xiao Fengshu, Zuo Qianqiu, and the rest had all perished in battle. In that case, the front line had collapsed, and 3rd Sand Camp had been wiped out before they could even send a signal. Great. Cool. Hopefully it's not that one. Regardless of which it was, they could not afford to underestimate this attack. Wu Ziyu didn't dare leave anyone else the responsibility of stalling for time. He had to guard this place himself. Wu Ziyu stormed through the squadron with his helmet in his hands. Which direction? He was still speaking when a boulder as large as his torso came plummeting out of the sky, smashing into the newly erected watchtower with a thunderous crash. Even before the sound of the watchtower's collapse reached them, it had knocked a group of tents flat. Catapults! The guard behind him shouted at the top of his voice. "General, they're coming around us from the south." "They're working with those fucking bandits," Wu Ziyu spat. "On your horses. They're encumbered by heavy equipment, so they snuck up quietly. Without the Gosha tribe ponies, they can't get away." No sooner had he spoken than frantic neighing rang out from the stables. As the panicked battle steeds raced through the camp, he could see flashes of scimitars and flames among the chaos. It seemed their enemies had the same idea as Wu Ziyu: slaughter all the horses they couldn't grab, and burn all the grain they couldn't carry. Leave nothing to send to the battlefields up north. Wu Ziyu could try to replace the provisions, but without those battle steeds, the base camp headed by Guo Weili would lose their combat ability. Motherfucker. Wu Ziyu tightened his grip on his blade. Tell Squadron 6 to leave with the horses, now. His guard swung up onto his horse. The tents near the stables were all aflame. As he charged over with his men, his saddle sank from under him. The guard felt a sick sense of foreboding the instant before the horse reared up. A Biancha soldier was under it, clinging to the girth of the saddle like a spider. Whipping a dagger out from the side of his leg, his assailant stabbed at the horse's belly. The dagger collided with the horse's armor, leaving a pale mark on the metal, but did not pierce through. The steed's front hooves landed back on the ground, and Wu Ziyu's guard tumbled off, drawing his blade and ramming into the Biancha soldier. The Libe armored cavalry's armor was too heavy for him to withstand. The impact forced the Biancha soldier back, his feet leaving furrows in the ground. Yet the guard's armor was not as tough as the horse's. He hacked off the Biancha soldier's head, but in getting close enough to strike, was also wounded by the man's scimitar. These Biancha soldiers were like locusts. They swarmed the trapped beast that was the Libe armored cavalry and fought to the death. The helmet Wu Ziyu had been about to put on had been struck from his hands. He was surrounded by enemy fighters. The fire had quickly spread from the stables to the paddock, where the other horses waited. Their blood-soaked cries pierced Wu Ziyu's ears. He was not a general skilled in combat, and his soldiers were likewise the Libe armored cavalry's reserve troops. They were a supply squadron first and foremost. They had only returned from the battlefield a few days ago, and their exhausted bodies couldn't withstand such a relentless assault. What was more, Wu Ziyu had been forced to divert some of their manpower to protect the craftsmen, who were just as important as the battle steeds. The guard climbed atop his horse once again and charged forward to knock down the blazing railings of the paddock. The battle steeds bolted. Put the craftsmen on the horses. Take off your armor. You need to ride as fast as possible to the bridleway. The breath was knocked out of Wu Ziyu as two men charged him from behind and flung him to the ground. As he tumbled, the back of his bare head struck the packed dirt. In the next moment, a rope was around his neck, and the two men began to drag him off. Wu Ziyu tugged at the rope, tightening around his neck. His voice came out as a hoarse squeak as he choked out the rest of his instructions. When you reach the camp, tell Zhao Hui to head north. Beads of sweat dripped into his eyes, which stung so painfully he could barely keep them open. Amid the churning smoke and dust, he struggled for breath as he watched the sky turn yellow. The soccer falcons that had torn Chu apart were hovering above him. Fuck. Grief overwhelmed Wu Ziyu. His vision blurred, his eyes burning with sweat and tears. He cursed over and over. Fuck. Dragged to the edge of the sea of fire amid the chaotic sounds of hoofbeats, Wu Ziyu collided with a boulder on the ground and desperately grabbed hold of a burning rail. The pain of the flames was excruciating. His grip faltered. Suddenly, the Sakar falcons banked and flew apart. A falcon cry pierced clear through to the clouds. Meng dropped down on the back of a Sakar falcon in midair and engaged in a fierce battle. At the same time, the sound of galloping horses closed in from afar. Wu Ziyu couldn't see through the smoke in his eyes. He caught only a vague glimpse of a tall figure riding steadily toward him on horseback. Surprised, he shouted, "The prince, your lordship!" Wu Ziyu felt a tight grip around his ankle. He heard Chen Yang bellow, "Drag him out." Feeling the rope constricting around his throat, Wu Ziyu croaked, "Drag me. My ass. I've still got a rope around my neck." Chen Yang let go and swiped his blade against the side. Chen Yang let go and swiped his blade against the side of Wu Ziyu's neck, scaring him so much his hair stood on end. Within seconds, he was tugged out of the fire, the rope still dangling down his chest. He rolled on the ground as they swatted at him to extinguish the flames. Gasping for air, he raised his eyes, squinting against the sunlight, and saw the rider dismount. The man brought his fingers to his lips and let out a long whistle. Meng shook the Sakar falcon from side to side as he swooped closer. The Sakar falcon shrieked in pain, its feathers raining down. Meng's sharp talons dug like blades into the bird's flesh. Breaking through the smoke, Meng landed in front of Xiao Qie and flicked his talons to toss the Sakar falcon to the ground. "Nope, not my old man." Meng perched on Xiao Qie's arm as they both looked back at Wu Ziyu. "It's your second young master." Well, that's the end of the chapter. Xiao Qie being badass as always. I don't really like the situation he has just arrived at, but at least he arrived. That's where we have to stop for the week. So, until Monday, who knows what is happening? The next chapter that we're reading has a particularly ominous title. Chapter 129 is Graveyard of Dreams. So that's nice. I do love the way, Wu Ziyu thought he was seeing Xiao Fengshu, and he was actually seeing Xiao Qie. Very, like father, like son. Henry, you're correct. Historical Danmei. Who even knows anymore? Who even knows? Yep. So, I don't know what I thought was gonna happen today, but it wasn't that. Yep, Blue, baby looks like his daddy. And, Henry, yeah, with this and Arha, we're having a graveyard of dreams, alright. I can agree there. Well, I've gotta go. I've gotta go drink lots more tea, and send good thoughts and wishes to the Libe Cavalry. And, I will see y'all again on Monday. So have a good rest of your week, and have a good weekend. Bye.